The faces that So I'm a Spider, So What will have on its central spider lead continue to entertain me beyond words. I mean, I could literally watch an hour straight of this show of just her reacting absurdly to whatever situation, whether it's warranted because you're looking at a giant ass dragon that can't be beat by the looks of it, or you stubbed your toe and she's going off the rails because of that pain. She's just an entertaining character, and without a doubt is my favorite part of the show. But I still see the importance to the human side. While the human side got a lot more kind of like focus this episode in comparison to the other two, I do see the potential, and I've heard a lot of good things about the actual story. And if you do want to have a story surrounding this and not just stick with a girl surviving in a cave and leveling up as she goes, you do need to have human characters because she can't really talk to anyone by the looks of it. It seems like all of her yammering is inside her head, as when she was running from these humans in the episode, there was no communication there, and if you could understand her, which it doesn't seem likely, I mean, they had no point in talking. They're like, we're going to cut this spider to pieces. So in order to have a story that's going to last, in the case of the anime, 24 episodes, in the case of the novel series, however many novels it is, you have to have something that has a punch, something that has a story and character development and things like that. And for a show about a girl alone in a cave, I mean, there's only so much she can do by herself. So, while the human side of the show hasn't entertained me even close to the spider side, I still see the importance. And I will say in this case, despite it having a lot of tropes you typically see in like fantasy isekai shows, like, oh, you're training with magic, here's the overly religious girl, here's the popular kind of like, you would assume is the self-insert for the viewer. You have one girl, Hsieh, who I think is probably the most interesting for me, just the idea of her actually having remorse for her bullying and now trapped inside this dragon body, which I think is really interesting. So I wouldn't really say she fits any trope for me. Hugo, who is another character I actually quite like, despite kind of being that overly annoying, kind of pissed off character. You could see him going off the deep end and joining a cult. There's a lot of tropes that they follow, but given the circumstances, we haven't had a lot of time to see them branch off from those tropes, but with the end of the episode with the whole kin eater situation, it does seem like we're getting into territory where they're truly going to start becoming more and more like people rather than just, yet again, another set of isekai characters who get to fill out their wish fulfillment and things like that. And I think that's the importance to looking at the show, is that while it is hilarious beyond words, I mean, the faces continue to crack me up, the jokes are well timed, and while the human side, in comparison, is a lot less interesting, you gotta look at it from the long-term point of view, and if you look at it from the long-term point of view, as long as the characters really start to get fleshed out, they get some good character development, and the story really gets going, then of course we're gonna be in it for the long haul, we're gonna see something truly interesting. If this was just gonna be a one-core, I would say, screw the human side, let's just focus on the spider side, we're in it for the comedy, but knowing that they are actually doing a two-core back-to-back, you need to give time to the human side. So sometimes when we do switch back over, I kind of get this kind of like, oh man, I really wanted to see more goofy shenanigans. But then again, the longer I watch, I'm like, well, at the very least, we're exploring the power system, we're understanding magic and things like that. We're getting more understanding that, some of the reincarnated students are very much worried about exposing the fact that they came from another world, so they're catching themselves saying their old names, not their new ones, where others are fine just being assholes and things like that. So there is some interesting things happening, and I do like the idea of this one religious girl who's like overly obsessed with God, and how the others are kind of like sort of like distancing themselves from her. You have the like generic like, oh, the brother's sister, like sister being overly jealous of any girl attaching to the brother, which I actually am curious for anyone. You can actually let me know down below. The brother and sister in this show, were they actually brother and sister in their previous life, or were they reincarnated as brother and sister in this world? I'm just generally interested if they're going like the direction of it was like a crush that is like still like crushing on him and now is unfortunately the sister, or if they are always brother and sister and it's just anime being anime or something like that. But I will say the Earth Dragon fight I thought was actually really fun. At first I was put off by the wonkiness of the CGI. It looked very off-putting, it didn't blend in quite as well as anything we've seen, but it was really only this one shot that bugged me. The rest actually blended in quite well. There's a couple of other moments past this one that I was like, oh, it doesn't look that great, but overall they actually did blend it quite well, so that does give me hope that if you can have a giant-ass earth dragon fighting a bunch of normal-looking characters, and they're all hand-drawn for the most part, they probably will have moments where they're kind of like 3D rendered and things like that just for certain moments, but, there were some pretty impressive action sequences on top of this earth dragon, and the fact that it wasn't just like a random dragon coming up and then they move on with their day to show how heroic the humans are, but rather to show that Hsieh actually had to end up being a kin eater That's actually pretty dark, all things considered, and I actually like the remorse in her eyes and the vomiting by the looks of it of the others. It's really interesting. I think they got some potential going forward for sure with that type of concept. And I'm curious if the other dragon we met in this episode is the other parent of Faye or, something like that. You never really know, right? So I'm really curious because if she ended up eating one of her kin, I wonder, what that does emotionally, because based on what we see in this world, there's a lot of mechanics that could really turn something that could just be forgettable into something pretty twisted in the long term, but I guess time will tell. Imagine leveling up because you ate your parent. That's pretty messed up, especially considering she really didn't want to do it, all things considered. But in terms of the funny stuff, there was a lot of goofy moments that I really enjoyed. When she was building up to that Spider-Man reference, I was really hoping they were going Spider-Man reference. And when I actually saw, her looking like a spider from the Spider-Man universe all suited up, I was like, that's good enough for me. But then seeing her swing around the city, that was just awesome. I really like it. There was even, some interesting ninja references. There's just, anytime she, changes her form, she's almost dressing up in costume, it's funny alone, but then seeing her actually execute those lines or the moves, it just really does bring a grin to my face, and I really enjoy it. The fact that we've seen how much absurdity is surrounding this spider, and they're still finding new ways to keep the comedy fresh and the excitement fresh for her. The idea that she's running from these humans and she's scared for her life. Oh shit, now there's snakes, there's this and that. And she actually really does feel like she's in a life or death situation, and it actually feels like a survival of the fittest situation. And it's a good thing her speed's quite well, because otherwise she would have easily died in this episode. It's crystal clear she's not going to die anytime soon. It feels like she's going to be around for a while, if not the entire story, so I imagine she's going to continue to level up and level up and level up, eventually becoming a big boss of the cave down the road. But based on how she's been leveling up so far and based on the pacing of the anime, they're not rushing to the OP-ness, so I'm actually appreciating that, to see her actually struggle, mainly for the comedy, but also to feel like she's working up to these skills. And I love the idea that she has this detection skill that immediately makes her head go wild. And the fact that we had a Spider-Man reference in this episode, it felt like she had Spidey sense going on, so I like that too. Just a great episode across the board. I'm actually appreciative of how much human we got in this episode, despite it not being nearly as entertaining as the Spider kind of slice of life comedy horror venture that we're seeing. I think it's really important to get them established so that we can get the story really rolling as the episodes progress. I'm actually really happy with how the 2D and 3D generally blends in. In the cave, as an example, when she was running from the humans, they, her and the humans were 2D drawn, and when she switched to a 3D render, she was running across the walls and ceiling, so it made sense to do that. In terms of the Earth Dragon, like I mentioned, there was one shot that bothered me, but for the most part, they either used smoke to cloud up the 3D so it looked like it matched the scene, or when they were actually attacking up close, they drew it. So there's, for the most part, they're finding a really good balance in terms of the 2D to the 3D, and I'm really happy with what they're delivering overall. I believe the studio who did the last Berserk anime that kind of everyone shit on, the production schedule is what screwed that around. They're the ones doing the 2D portion, and then there's another studio doing the 3D portion. So far, they're working quite well in harmony, and I'm hoping that momentum's going to keep going. And the fact that they're not just showing it with smaller creatures, but pretty large ones, it does says to me that, the action and the blending should continue to be solid going forward. But then again, maybe that's just the optimist in me, but time will tell. So far, I'm really liking it though. Let me know your thoughts down below. Did you love it? Did you hate it? And what did you think of the Earth Dragon battle and the Kin Eater situation? Because I thought that was pretty gruesome, all things considered. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like to show your support and hit that subscribe button if you happen to be new around here. So until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.